Hi-ho, hello, what's the dealio? Look, if there's one thing YouTube has demonstrated to me about the art community, outside of how amazingly creative everyone is, it's that we artists are very good at complaining.
90% of what we do is complain.
98.5.
I'm serious.
99.
Maybe that comes as an extension of our preferred life paths, as I could totally see fantasy and sci-fi art being born out of complaints over how boring real life is. Of course, when you get a bunch of people together who share a common interest, one of the things they also tend to discover they share is common things that bother them, which is probably why you could scroll through a plethora of art channels on YouTube and find a slew of videos talking about each of their individual artistic pet peeves. From losing your digital pens to amateurs misusing your traditional ones, smudges in charcoal, accidentally drinking your paint water, or corruptions in your art program failing to save hours of work. And of course, the ever-present everybody seems to have experiences in this and it seemingly bothers all of them.
Can you draw me?
But I'm gonna level with you guys. That topic is ubiquitous within the art community. It's almost like a rite of passage to have a video where you talk about your personal pet peeves when it comes to making art. Don't get it confused, I'm not saying that it's bad in any way. I don't want people thinking that I'm being negative towards the topic as a whole, nor the people who have made those kinds of videos. I actually think it's interesting to see which sorts of little nuisances irk certain people the most, and I happen to think it's a good way to expand on your own personal grievances to your audience. Connection and mutual understanding and all that social species jazz. But because of how common they are, that does sort of make me wonder, at this point, how many people are just scouring the internet for common pet peeves to list in their own video, rather than really taking the time to sit back and gauge which ones have bothered them the most, personally, over the course of their artistic journey. And that's not even a factor worth considering if they're maybe asking their audience what their personal grievances are, and then just expanding on those from the perspective of the person asking for that input as a topic of conversation. I think it's nice to talk about the things your audience details to you as being the things that bother them, because it allows them to feel a little more seen, and like the issues that tug at their heartstrings are valid things to be miffed about. But I don't know how accurate any assessment of those issues is going to be if it's being addressed by someone who maybe doesn't have as much investment in that topic as a problem that they have struggled with. Like, you could ask me to talk about how annoying it is to have to clean your brushes after finishing with a big, complex oil painting. Sure, I could probably cover the basics, but I feel like I wouldn't be able to delve into a lot of the nuance simply because it's not something I think about or interact with a lot. I am primarily a digital artist, so at this point I have far less experience in that medium. There would absolutely be people who could explain those issues way better than I ever could. So while I might make a personal art pet peeves video in the future, maybe once I've thought about it a little more, I thought I'd try a slightly different route. Ladies and gentlemen and everybody in between, outside, and in various stages of smart, I present to you the pet peeves I have with the people who create art. Fair warning, I'm still writing this script, and despite that, it's currently around 56 pages, so we'll see how things go. We'll start with an easy one because I'm going to take a wild guess that a lot of people probably have a similar experience and really dislike the people who do this. That being, artists who ghost you and never complete their end of an art trade. I think I've had a couple experiences like this, but there's only one that I can properly remember by this point because the other ones were a lot earlier in my life. I was approached by an artist on Tumblr, I think around the time I was doing original character roleplays with a totally separate artist that I followed, where they take one of their characters and you take one of your characters and you put them together and see how interactions between them would play out. Anyways, I hadn't done a lot of art trades in the past, but the back and forth roleplay art was making me want to branch out a little more and open myself up to possible collaborations and trades with other artists. You know, making me a little more open to the idea of interacting with the wider community. So when I was approached, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. Yeah, that didn't really work out so great. I completed my half, sent it over to them, they seemed to love it and told me that they were working on their half and would get it done within the week. So I waited. And waited. And waited. Long past a week. Eventually, I figured that maybe they'd forgotten, because when I checked their page, they were very clearly posting other art pieces, but the way I saw it, maybe these were older pieces that they just hadn't gotten around to posting yet. I sent out a message asking how they were. They responded with something along the lines of them having been stressed in their home life and things being very busy, so I didn't want to be a big ol' nuisance and stress them out more. So I continued waiting. And soon enough, saw a piece where they flat out spelled it out in the description that this was a recent piece that they had just completed. So I tried reaching out again, asking how the trade was coming along. No response. Waited a week. Tried again. No response. Eventually I noticed they had unfollowed me. Okay, I see how it is. Now, I should specify, I didn't completely close myself off to the prospect of art trades after this point. I actually remember going on to either Fur Affinity or DeviantArt and basically being like, hey guys, I just had a bad experience with an art trade. Anyone want to help drown out that experience with a better one? And so I did get to do a few art trades past that point with cool people. Regardless, I don't like the people who do this. If you don't want to do an art trade, don't offer to do a fucking art trade. Like, I was not coming to them and bothering an artist who just wasn't good at saying no. They came to me, meaning they should have been incentivized to do the thing that they came to me, effectively promising they were willing to do. If the character the other artist suggests isn't one that you want to draw, tell them that. If something goes down in your life that makes it difficult for you to get your half done, don't string the other person along claiming you're still going to do it while you work on other things. Even if it's a case of you simply not being in the right mood to draw a particular thing, I feel like another artist would generally be receptive to that because they've probably experienced something similar. Maybe there's a compromise that the two of you could come to so the end result isn't just you effectively scamming another person out of their art and time and ruining the whole trade experience for them. I mean, hell, in this day and age, that'll just get someone to make an exposed document on you. Stupid as it may seem, it does happen. I've seen it. It's just uncool, and I'm not gonna lie, it did sour my opinion of art trades for a long time. Like, if someone came up to me asking why I don't currently do art trades, I would cite this experience as one of the reasons why. Artists who do this just make it so that other people in the community don't even want to bother. They stop it from being fun, and art should be fun. Next up, artists who steal your art supplies. Guaranteed, every single person who drew in high school or who attended an art school or had artist friends has experienced this to some degree, especially as children, because most children suck. And if you did this as a child, then you're not exempt from that. One of the things that I know artists hate is when they get their hands on some really good, potentially niche, potentially expensive artistic supplies, and they end up losing it somehow. Of course, in those situations, it's typically accidental or outside of their control, which just makes it an unfortunate bit of bad luck. That is completely different in any case where some uppity fucker comes along and takes it for their own, because that is an active slight against you, and so there's someone who deserves your ire. It doesn't even have to be niche or expensive. It could be just a pen that you particularly enjoy using. Maybe the way it curves fits perfectly into the writer's callus on your finger. Maybe you've chewed the end into a perfect point that's great for scratching that itch on your back. Maybe it's got a cute little design on it that you haven't been able to find anywhere else. Whatever the reason, it's yours, and yet someone else has decided that it's now theirs, completely bereft of your input because you would deny them that luxury, and we all know that they can't have that. I had this happened to me quite a number of times when I was in school, and I noticed a couple things in that time frame. Firstly, it got more frequent as I got older, and I had more art supplies for people to steal. Secondly, while the behavior was not unique to artists, when an artist steals your supplies, it tends to be so that they can use them. When other people do it, it's so that they can destroy them. Oh, I remember plenty of art classes where my supplies just sort of up and vanished, only for them to appear in someone else's supplies a month later, and oh, magically they can't remember where they got them, but they would assure me that they bought it with their own money. That chewing on the end that seems to match every other pencil in my set? Nah, mate, that's just a coincidence. You're seeing things. Then you've got the multiple instances where people sort of just dove into my pencil case without asking when I wasn't around because they needed a pen, only for them to use the same pressure on a .05 fine liner as one would use for a regular ballpoint pen, how were they supposed to know that doing so would destroy the nib and make the pen unusable? Pay you back? Why would I pay you back for it? It's just a pen. Just grab a replacement from the teacher's desk. You know, the thing that I could have done. I feel kind of bad including this one because yeah, we all know that artist supplies are expensive. 100%. There are artists out there who steal supplies from their rich friends because they know that they can afford it. They know that whatever they take can be easily replaced. And if they don't take the opportunity to take it from them, they fear that they'll never be in a position where they'll be able to get them otherwise. But on top of that not mattering and showcasing that you have no respect for another person's belongings if you have decided they reach a certain financial threshold, I also know that there are people who just don't fucking care. They see a thing, they like the thing, they know that you own it, and they take it anyways. Or they see a thing, know that you own it, are jealous that you own it, and simply don't want you to have it. Doesn't mean that they have to have it, just means that you don't, which is typically where destruction of private property comes into play. Even more annoying when they know you don't have the money to splurge on expensive art supplies, and that you only get them as a treat to yourself or as a birthday gift from others once in a blue moon, and they steal them anyway. Ooh, the people who saw me struggling in high school and still took my art supplies, I'll drag you down to the bottom of the ocean myself. And I'm sure plenty of people have known at least one artist where literally all of their supplies were lifted from other creatives. Like they've never been to a Desserts or Michaels or Curry's once in their life, but somehow have their entire stock on hand. Like, from a certain perspective, I can understand this mentality. I know that jealousy can be a really powerful motivator, for kids especially. I'm sure that most people have experienced that one kid where they're hell-bent on getting their hands on something just because someone else has it, but once they've achieved that goal, they don't actually care, because the goal was never the thing itself, it was simply the perceived social standing of being in possession of the thing. So maybe someone convinces themselves that they deserve it more because it allows them to frame their malicious actions as justifiable. As an artist, however, that knowledge doesn't stop the practice from being really annoying. Get your own damn supplies. This is one that's actually cropped up more recently, but it reminded me that I've seen it before and I found it just as tone deaf as back in the day. Next up, number 3, because I guess I'm numbering these now. Artists who mock others for using chicken scratch. So, if you're unaware, chicken scratch is a term that refers to what is effectively unrefined, messy sketches or line art. It's a technique that is very common with younger or less experienced artists. Shocker, a lot of my pet peeves with artists comes from the ones who bully or discourage others for not being good enough. That's also not to say that chicken scratch is unique to budding artists, just that it is very common with them. Big difference between those two things. There's been a bit of a trend on TikTok lately, but second verse same as the first, it's not the first time I've seen this as a topic of conversation. Though I think the last time I saw it directly, I may have actually still been in high school myself. Presently, people are getting it in their heads that chicken scratch is bad, and if your sketches look like chicken scratch, that means you're a bad artist. Yeah, pretty obvious right from the get-go that this mentality is probably mostly coming from kids. Sometimes you hear a bad take and it's so tone deaf that you just instantly know, oh, that came from the brain of a child. Kind of like how you hear really edgy, pessimistic, but technically lacking takes and know that they likely came from a young teen, or really optimistic and creative but ultimately single-minded takes and know that they came from a young adult. Not only did the artists grandstanding on techniques in this situation decide to make something that is none of their business their personal crusade, their mindset is so self-involved that their personal subjective opinion now becomes something that everyone else should apparently be aspiring to. Oh, but I thought you weren't going to rag on kids for things that we all did. Honey, if you went around in your youth berating other artists for not sketching in the way that you personally found preferable, that's a problem. My pet peeves come from artists berating others for doing things that are harmless. Even if they consider the technique itself harmful to the growth of those they're criticizing, that's none of their concern. I may not necessarily agree with a person's refusal to take criticism if they want to improve, but that is ultimately their choice to make, not mine. See, when I heard that people were promoting this, one very obvious thing popped into my mind. What about disabled artists? Yes, even if AI bros might have you believe that those who are physically disabled are just incapable of creating, disabled artists do exist. Their disability doesn't have to be noticeable in their work for that to be valid. However, as a technique, chicken scratch immediately stood out to me as something that you might see in the work of someone with coordination or mobility issues. Consider, if you will, how a toddler draws. They tend to be very determined in what they're doing, so there's not a lot of hesitation, but their lines are messy, uncoordinated, or shaky at best. An adult has comparable drive, but may hesitate more because not only is their goal more intricate, they are far more cognizant of the various steps they would have to take in order to achieve it. A disabled adult, however, would have these similar goals and concerns, but may ultimately struggle with keeping their lines uniform, much like the shaky, unrefined lines of a child still learning stability and coordination, resulting in a more defined figure crafted with less refined line work. This is where the technique of chicken scratch could come in really handy. Even though the technique seems unrefined, when used in conjunction with an ideal, it simply becomes a necessary part of how the piece is constructed. And that's only giving physical reason for the technique. What about personal preferences? What if the artist in question just prefers a scratchy, messy sketching style? Clean lines are nice to look at sometimes, but much like everything in life, too much of a good thing becomes a poison on the mind. If everyone drew with really clean, deliberate lines, I think we would get bored. We need those variations in spice to draw out the delicious visual appeal in everybody's individual talents. From my experience, as an artist grows and becomes wiser in their craft, they tend to try to reject aspects of their style that they don't like, and this would include chicken scratch. If an artist hasn't done that, it's potentially because they aren't skilled enough yet, they're physically incapable, or they simply prefer how it looks. I don't really see why that should be such an issue. If anything, the artists furthering the notion that you can't draw in chicken scratch are just pushing their own artistic preferences or insecurities onto others. Like, I don't think there's more of a surefire way to indicate to me that you're self-conscious about aspects of your own art than by complaining about it in others. Chicken scratch as a technique is not indicative of a bad artist, but dictating what harmless sketching techniques people are or are not allowed to use based on your personal preferences is certainly indicative of a toxic, entitled one. Number 4, artists who exaggerate emergency commissions. Another thing that is not unique to artists, but since we are talking about artists who annoy me, and the artists who do this do annoy me, I'm going to talk about it. Being online, I'm sure that plenty of artists or consumers of art content have seen emergency commissions crop up now and again. Generally, it goes that something happens that disrupts the artist's life in a negative way, and they are struggling to stay afloat financially. To put things simply, they need money and they need it fast. Of course, this could be for a variety of different reasons. Medical bills, vet bills, an unexpected flood in the basement, having to bail a loved one out of jail, a now ex-family member stealing a whole ton of money. On the other hand, I'm of the mindset that people online shouldn't feel compelled to pry into someone's personal life. People should share only what they're comfortable sharing, and they shouldn't feel pressured into revealing more than that. Hell, maybe the reason they needed the money wasn't exactly what they claimed it to be online, but that's because while the thing that they do need it for is equally as or even more serious, it's also way more embarrassing, and they just didn't feel comfortable being that open with strangers online. It's been quite a few years since it happened, but I do vaguely recall an artist using that tactic only for someone to call them out on it, accusing them of lying to scam their audience. People started disputing the commission orders, trying to get their money back, and so the artist was forced to reveal the embarrassing circumstances surrounding why they needed the money anyways. Unsurprisingly, the audience then turned on the person who accused them of being a scammer, and if I'm remembering correctly, that person refused to admit fault because they felt that since the artist did technically lie about why they needed the money, them prying into the artist's life to force the reveal of the more embarrassing truth was totally justified. I don't hold anything against the artists who do this in earnest, because as the name of this section sorta implies, my issue comes from those who exaggerate the nature of the so-called emergency. If you're not exaggerating why you need the money and you're just choosing to obscure something that is just as serious as you said it was, but simply too personal to talk about with strangers, it's not hard to understand why someone might do that. With that said, on the other hand, if you're going to be compelling people into becoming your financial safety net by appealing to their empathy, I feel as though those people should get some level of assurance that their goodwill is not being taken advantage of. For this reason, I do struggle with that stance a wee bit in these scenarios, simply because of the number of times I have seen this tactic abused. Some people are just way too comfortable making their subscribers worry about their safety or their financial stability, even in cases where there's no actual reason to do that. There's something about the idea of another person getting anxious because they're worried that you're not going to have enough food or that you're going to lose your house or something that really gets my anxiety flaring up. Just the thought of putting that much pressure or worry on another person is so uncomfortable. I don't know what my subscribers have to go through on a daily basis. I don't want them worrying themselves into a tizzy thinking that I'm in danger or something. That just seems cruel. When an artist opens emergency commissions, you expect it to be for an emergency, not because they ran out of money in their budget for their streaming subscriptions or because they want to buy the latest AAA horror game. What they're actually doing here, aside from making their subscribers worry unnecessarily, is jading people to the concept of emergency commissions, meaning when other artists actually have an emergency and desperately need people to purchase from them, that is going to be a more difficult task because people are now of the mindset that those asking for commissions for the sake of an emergency are not actually in need of help. Much like the case of the boy who cried wolf, their selfish actions are making life needlessly more complicated for everybody else. What's even more frustrating about that is that commissioners tend to be a little more understanding about the products they're paying for taking longer to produce when they're buying them under those circumstances. They have this expectation that the artist is already stressed and that while the funds are supposed to help with that, ultimately there are other responsibilities that the artist will have to get out of the way before the client can actually get what they paid for. So people are usually willing to wait a little longer than they normally would, and sometimes they're willing to give the artist more leeway and will not try to pester them about it too much. I've heard plenty of horror stories about artists who wouldn't complete the commission, but still expected the commissioner to just let them keep the money because they needed it for an emergency. And these are the situations where I worry that is going to happen the most, where the client will just eat the loss because it was an emergency and I was trying to help. The thought of these people having their goodwill taken advantage of and then just being walked all over like that is enough to make my noodly little arms want to start swinging. Of course, the absolute worst ones in this camp are the ones who flat out lie about there being an emergency in the first place. Some of these people will classify them as emergency commissions, but they will at least specify the non-emergency thing that the funds are for. The liars are a real problem, as it will turn out what they actually wanted the money for was something frivolous, but they will swear up and down to you that this is not the case. It's just that these people realize it's easier to spur your audience into action if they think you're in need of help, which is so bloody disgusting. The nerve of some people to so keenly take advantage of another person's goodwill like that. While I may have my suspicions because of a person's online behavior, this one's a little more difficult to prove outright because you never really know what's going on in someone's personal life. The few times I've seen this myself, while the lie has been insulting to their audience, they haven't been outright heinous. Usually these people are asking for maybe $60 to $80, rarely more than $100, and they're getting these funds from multiple clients. So it's almost never one single client being deceived into giving them a lot of money all at once. It's spread out across a couple different people to make it more affordable for them all individually. That doesn't make what the artist is doing good, but at the very least, it's not doing any potential harm to another person's finances. I mean, if you're not going to be able to pay rent because you ordered a $15 emergency commission, that's sorta on you. I have seen some situations online where it was proven that the individual was lying. I know that there was this person on TikTok who claimed that they were unhoused and that they were raising money for a medical procedure, only for someone to prove that it was all going to a high-end car and a housing complex in a pretty affluent neighborhood. Or, you know, the multiple times now people have faked cancer to raise money, but I'm not as familiar with that in the art community. Maybe a couple, but my brain can't actually pinpoint anything specific. I think I did hear talk of a comic book artist a while back who did that, but I didn't really look into it at the time because it was regarding a book that, truth be told, based on the reason they said it was made, I had no intention of buying the book anyways, so I can't actually be sure. That's not to say that these situations don't exist, because they definitely do. I'm just not omnipotent. I'm forgetful and I don't really like interacting with people for extended periods of time, and so I'm not aware of everything that goes on in the community. Point is, it's a pet peeve because with the first version of these artists, they're getting people worried for things that are not emergencies, and for the other version, I know these fuckers exist, but I don't immediately know who they are. Sneaky little parasites. Number 5, artists who constantly complain about ruining their sketches. Look, I get the plight of ruining a piece that you were starting out really fond of. Trust me, I get it. Much like I understand initially enjoying a piece, looking at it again a week later, and then wondering what in the bloody blue hell you were even thinking. Artists having a preference for their original sketches over the finished product is not something new, and a lot of it comes from the extra detail within the sketch itself that ends up getting lost when translated to line art. Achieving that balance is, in and of itself, a skill that one needs to train. Of course, I understand where people are coming from with this. I have plenty of pieces that simply ended at the line art or coloring phase because I either wasn't confident enough in my skills to make the finished piece look as good as I wanted it to, or because I simply didn't know where I wanted to take it from there. Some pieces I did try to go that extra mile, but ended up having that same issue and stopping halfway through the coloring process because I lost the plot. I should really go back to a couple of these now that so much time has passed. But the people who will not shut the fuck up about ruining their sketches on every single damned piece are the most irritating, exhausting little self-flagellators. There is only so much complaining that I can take. Ironic in a video where I'm essentially complaining about pet peeves, I guess. So much of my annoyance from these people really just comes from their unwillingness to do anything about the problem they have, especially when there are very easy tricks that they could try to fix the issue at hand, and they just don't. There are problems in our lives that are either too widespread for us as individuals to do anything about on our own, like political corruption or a mass genocide happening on the other side of the planet, or which are things that we don't presently have the resources to fix. However, art is unique in that we can solve these problems. Maybe not always on our own, but that's where input from friends or other artists can come in really handy. If you don't know where to go with a piece, bringing in another person with a different perspective than you can do wonders. They might even be able to offer up a solution or a viewpoint that you would have never considered that not only makes the piece 10 times better, but also reinvigorates your artistic drive by providing you with a muse. You could also try just stepping away from the piece for a while, a week away, or maybe even a month or two, and all of a sudden when you come back to it, your perspective has changed. In that regard, my pet peeve with these artists comes from their unwillingness to actually seek out a solution to their problem. All they ever want to do is complain, and while complaining can be cathartic at times, if you're constantly struggling with the same issue and never doing anything about it, complaining becomes more of a crutch. It becomes the go-to response to making these mistakes so that you don't have to solve the problem. You sketch out a piece, ink and color it to come to a result that you don't enjoy, let out all of your emotional frustration in one big complaint session, and then you move on to a different piece where you repeat the process over again. For those who are then forced over and over to sit there and listen to these artists complaining about a problem that they've never even tried to fix, it's like watching someone fail 100 times on a video game level that you're perfectly aware how to beat. Much like with many things in life, it is more reasonable for kids or teenagers to do this because they probably don't have enough technical knowledge or life experience to come up with solutions to their problem. And so I have way less patience for adults in this regard. So to prevent these artists continuing along with their excuses, I'm going to give you guys a couple different options you could try to combat these issues if it's something that you yourself are struggling with. Firstly, while you're in the inking process, regularly hide the line art so that you can check to make sure that your lines and proportions are maintained across the piece in the way that you want. Overall, I find it best to reduce the opacity of your sketch layer a fair amount when inking. Personally, I like to go down to around 30, 20, or even 15%. Not only does it allow you to draw over it without the two images blending together in your brain, it becomes way easier to differentiate your sketch from the line art so that you can see exactly where these mistakes are being made. If you don't do this, then your line art can become lost in the sketch lines, and then they sort of just bleed together. Some of y'all might be thinking, isn't that sort of a default? Trust me, I've seen people who don't do that. You might be surprised, actually. Secondly, give scratchy or unfinished line art a try. If you have a heavy preference for your sketches over your line art, it might just be that the style of the line art you're using is not to your tastes. A lot of people have this incorrect expectation that clean line art is the ideal, but truthfully, it's not for everybody, and sometimes your line art should change depending on the piece. Hell, that's why digital artists utilize different brushes for inking, because giving your line art a different look can convey different meanings within the piece. Back when I was working on those Rowdy 3 busts, I specifically had to go searching through Clip Studio assets for a rougher brush, since because of comic books being a prominent inspiration for me, I usually use really clean, bold, and dramatic line art, and that simply wasn't going to work for lifelike busts of a bunch of rambunctious, chaotic gutter punks. I wanted the line art to match the vibe of the characters themselves. There are lots of different things that you can do with line art. If you're unsure about which style would look the best, try making a couple different copies of your piece and testing out various line art styles to see which one meshes the best with what you're trying to achieve. Which actually brings me to my third option. Give copies of the sketch to your artist friends or your subscribers, if you have a wide enough audience for this to be possible, and ask them to ink and color it. See what they come up with. Maybe turn it into a collaboration project. Analyze what you like and don't like about the results. If you're a creator, you can not only turn that into content, but you could use it as a means of promoting other artists to your followers. I'm sure that the people who took the time to help you would really appreciate that. Fourthly, instead of inking, why not just clean up the sketch and use that as the line art? Not only have I seen plenty of artists use that technique, I've done it before a couple times, and I can tell you it's quite fun. It works out splendidly if you're trying for a more rough painted aesthetic. You can even color or slightly paint over the sketch itself to make it blend into the piece better. The fifth and final option I present to you is to just upload the sketch as is. Seriously, if you always end up preferring the sketch to the final product, then just stick with the sketch. There's nothing that says you have to render every piece. Hell, there's nothing that says you have to render any piece. Art is personal, and unless the point of the piece is to piss you off, you should enjoy what you produce. So why not stick to the steps that you actually like? That's not to say that you shouldn't still make an effort to go a little further if that is something that you want to get better at. You can only improve in the things that you practice after all, but you don't necessarily need to post the results if you're not satisfied with them. As said by Paul Valerian, translated by Rosalie Maggio, in the eyes of those who anxiously seek perfection, a work is never truly completed, a word for them that has no sense, but abandoned. And this abandonment of the book to the fire or to the public, whether due to weariness or a need to deliver it for publication, is a sort of accident, comparable to the letting go of an idea that has become so tiring or annoying that one has lost all interest in it. Essentially, this means a work of art is never truly finished, merely abandoned. In that sense, anything you produce will never reach its end by virtue of its own destiny. As the artist, you decide when something is done through how much time you choose to put into it. And if you choose to abandon it as a sketch, then only as a sketch was it ever meant to exist. Number F. Older artists who are jealous of the opportunities had by younger artists. This one I find to be super dumb. Okay, so for context, I didn't get on the internet until I was 14. I didn't start exploring digital art until I was past 15. I didn't get a digital art tablet until I was 16. To contrast that, nowadays we have literal children being raised on iPads and the internet before they are even in preschool. There is a huge difference between older generations of artists and the upcoming generations. While modern generations are growing up with in-depth video tutorials, step-by-step breakdowns, and the ability to solicit criticisms from older, more experienced creators from across the globe, not to mention the endless examples of varying artistic styles presented to them online, we grew up on Peter Gray's How to Draw Manga. I know I just gave some of y'all traumatic flashbacks with that one. It is not at all surprising that they are excelling faster than we did. Not to mention, children tend to pick up on and learn things easier than adults do because they have little sponges for brains. Like, if anything, be jealous of them for that. The older artists who get angry at them for having better, more varied opportunities to grow than they did when they were kids are jealous troglodytes. I can understand having some jealous thoughts. I can understand wishing that you had the same resources growing up, but it's not the kids' fault. Why get mad at them when they are just trying to learn? That's sort of the nature of a developing world. As things things get better, upcoming generations are going to have an easier time excelling in certain areas. That's the point, to make the world a better place for future generations. Yet, time and again, you will have older generations being upset by this. Back in my day, blah blah blah. What, you're mad at them for utilizing the resources you yourself acknowledge you would utilize were you at their age? Sure. That sounds fair. Kids should be jealous of us because we had childhoods that weren't dominated by the disgusting, soul-crushing, self-esteem destroying standards presented to them on a daily basis by tone-deaf influencers and money-hungry companies desperate to push them into adulthood as fast as possible so they can milk them for every penny that they have. And you know what? I'm gonna say that I can even understand being jealous of some situations where older artists are snubbed from an opportunity in favor of a younger artist. I know that there's a trend in some creative industries, animation and potentially comic books in particular, where older generations of creatives are being phased out for younger ones, not because the newer generations are more skilled than they are, nor because the older generations can no longer do the job, but because they're cheaper. Oftentimes because they're not as skilled. Practically hiring them right out of school and when they don't yet understand what an acceptable level of expectation is for that new job. That I can understand. I think any potential anger should be directed towards the companies that are choosing to hire cheaper labor to save a buck and not the artists who are just trying to get a job and who are, all things considered, kinda getting cheated. But at the very least, I could understand the jealousy felt towards them for getting the job. Or perhaps the dissatisfaction with knowing that for every artist you convince to actively charge their worth, there will just be another one waiting in the wings to scoop that opportunity up without a care for how that affects the industry expectations in the long run. Yet, in that regard, since these are primarily adult artists that I'm talking about here, I would expect them to have some level of self-reflection and to put that jealousy aside when interacting with younger artists, especially in a professional setting. The irony being that if every older artist discouraged newer generations from going into art, they would die out and we would eventually run out of artists. Given how personal art is, we should be encouraging and propping up younger artists. Their voices are just as important, especially with the ever-shifting and frighteningly fast growth of technology in the modern age. How will artists choose to express themselves in a world dominated by AI content? What does it feel like to grow up in a world of such convincing forgeries that you can't trust anything? How will a generation raised by iPads communicate their need for connection and love? What would art look like when created by a generation with lacking motivation and short attention spans? How do younger artists see the growing conflicts of the world? How will they showcase their concerns about that through their content? The world will always need artists of every living generation for us to be able to understand the vast array of perspectives that exist and why those viewpoints can help us to understand one another. That's the goal of art, right? To convey perspectives that cannot be easily communicated with words, to appeal to people emotionally at much deeper, more intimate levels. It is the responsibility of older artists to teach the younger generations how to survive in an ever-changing landscape that is becoming progressively more hostile to creatives, to pass on their wisdom so that the craft can continue to evolve. Equally, we should be learning from them because they are growing up in a world that is completely foreign to us by this point. And if our own art has any chance of speaking to a generation raised on technology, then we need to understand their perspective. Not to mention, if they better understand the developing technologies with how fast they're growing, we need to understand them to a degree as well. The human body is flawed and weak, barely lasting a century on its own. It is through our art and our children that we are able to live longer than life would allow. Yet art can only survive if it speaks to people on a personal level. If your art can't speak to the younger generations because your perspective is too out of date, because you were too wrapped up in your own jealousy to acknowledge that these are just people like you, then how are you expecting it to last? On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have letter 7. Artists who obsess over likes on their posts so much that they make it your problem. I'm not great with numbers. Like, fucking, if this wasn't obvious. Not when it pertains to socials. I actually kinda try not to think about them. But that's not to say that I don't understand why people focus on them, especially in this day and age. As unfortunate as it may be, we have a whole generation of new artists growing up to see the numbers as the end-all be-all qualifiers for what makes good art, which is really sad when you actually think about it. Likes and reblogs and comments and subscribers. Engagement on your posts can be very important, especially on websites where engagement is what stimulates the algorithm and pushes your content into the feeds of potential new viewers. That's why bait content is so prevalent. Content that is specifically designed to instill a strong emotional reaction in the audience, usually anger, so that they will comment and increase engagement. You see this in artist circles a lot too, but the ones I'm more familiar with are the "if we get X level of engagement, they'll take off a piece of clothing" posts, or the "engage X amount for me to reveal X whatever" posts. For as much as I view the practice as transparent clout whoring, it's also relatively harmless and easy to ignore. It's the ones who make that lack of engagement your problem that start to really annoy me. The artists who do these types of engagement bait posts spam your feed with it because they are not getting the engagement that they want, and when they continue to fail to get this engagement, they whine and bemoan their subscribers for not giving it to them. I had actually totally forgotten about this, but writing that line alone gave me a flashback to someone doing it back when I used Tumblr. They reblogged the same post multiple times within the hour because people weren't responding to it fast enough. Like, chill, bruh, you've got like 100 subscribers and the majority of them are probably in school. I even vividly remember one instance where someone did make one of those "I'll do X if I get X many likes on this image" posts, and the number of likes they were asking for was literally higher than their subscriber count, which means that they were counting on their subscribers to reblog it so that it reached into their circles and accumulated enough interest from totally new viewers in order for them to do the thing that they were promising. It was no longer a matter of their subscribers giving them what they wanted, it was the responsibility of their subscribers' subscribers. Literally, even if all of their subscribers had liked the post, it wouldn't have been good enough. Like, at some point you have to understand that not all of your subscribers are going to like all of your content. Some people take social media breaks, some people abandon old accounts, some people only follow you for very niche content, and some people are like me and they specifically don't feed into or respond well to these types of posts. But then the worst is when they don't reach that goal and they start guilt-tripping their audience for them not reaching what was so very clearly too high of a goal, as if it's somehow the audience's fault that their expectations were so ridiculous. Especially because sometimes you can tell that some of these artists already have these pieces prepared, particularly the ones where they're all "give me X engagement and this character will take off their clothes." So now they're mad because they've prepared all of these pieces ahead of time and they feel cheated because they can't post them. I guess being completely unaware that you could literally just do a multi-image post where the character was stripping. It doesn't have to be for the sake of engagement farming. If you like the art, you can just post it. Oh, and there's a special place at the bottom of the Mariana Trench for the ones who then hold the fact that their subscribers aren't going to see the end results because they didn't give them that engagement over their heads. Basically rubbing it in the face of all the subscribers who tried. Because, shocker, the people who didn't engage with it probably don't care. But the people who did, do. Shaming and punishing them for, like, what? Not liking hard enough? I'm sure that they're trying to shame those who didn't like the posts, but again, those guys probably don't care. And they're certainly not going to respond well to being shamed for not engaging with a piece on your terms. Much like art, favorites and likes are personal, unique to the individual, which means everybody has different criteria for what they do and do not like. For the longest time, the only posts that I would like on Twitter were pieces of fan art that people had made for me. Hell, that's only talking about these stupid engagement bait posts, because hot damn, that is not the only time they will berate you for not engaging with their content. I'd even argue that the most egregious instances are them complaining just generally about a lack of engagement on their art. Not getting enough likes on your illustrations? Blame the subscribers, clearly it's their fault. Sure, if you're really concerned about numbers, I can see how regularly not getting a lot of likes on your art could really be a hindrance to your motivation. It might make you feel like what you make isn't good enough, or it might make you question what you're doing wrong. However, there are two things that I want to pose to you here. Firstly, You don't know how the algorithm picks up your work and shows it to other people, or even whether it does. I think a lot of us are very aware that algorithms can screw with whether or not your content is seen, even by your subscribers. As someone who makes content on YouTube, I know that it doesn't get pushed to everyone sometimes. Search the platform enough and you'll find plenty of comments from people talking about how YouTube isn't notifying them when their favorite creators put out new videos, or when they are inexplicably unsubscribed from channels they were subscribed to. The same thing could be happening to your art and you simply wouldn't know. You couldn't know. To cite another example, I follow an artist named Marcus Williams on Twitter. Despite this, his work does not show up in my following feed as it should. He only shows up in my For You page, which I never scroll through because it's a bunch of people I'm not following and I'm not interested in following. I actually didn't even know that I wasn't seeing Williams's content for a really long time, and it was only after Twitter automatically switched me over to the For You page, as it sometimes annoyingly does, that I realized he was still posting work and I just wasn't getting any of it in the right feed. A lack of engagement on your posts does not inherently mean that people dislike the content. It might just be that something is inhibiting how it's being shared. If you're really worried about it, wait a couple weeks, maybe even a couple months, and then try reblogging it on your own. It could just be that the piece was on people's feeds at an inopportune time, so don't feel bad about reblogging your art every once in a while, especially if it's a piece that you're proud of. Sometimes a piece that didn't speak to someone 3 months ago will speak to them in the present day. Maybe they didn't know who the character you were drawing was. Maybe they didn't get the joke. Maybe they were in a bad mood. Maybe they were self-conscious about their own pieces and seeing your art just made that feeling worse. You don't always know why people don't like your work, and while I understand that it's very easy to boil things down to it's simply not good enough, that is not always the case, and I think people need to be more conscious of that. Art gains in popularity because it speaks to a broad audience, and if something is inhibiting that, whether it be from the algorithm or audience members simply not being in the right mindset for it at the time, that is not your fault. Secondly, if you are exclusively making art for the sake of getting likes, maybe it's just me, but I feel like you're doing it for the wrong reasons. The cool thing about art is that even if nobody else likes it, as long as you do, you still end up feeling fulfilled by making it, and making it look the way that you want it to. If you're only making it for the sake of getting engagement and you don't get that engagement, what do you have by the end of the day? I feel like the people who push all of their number problems onto their audience and make it their problem really need to reassess why they're even making art. Number octopus! Artists who condescend to other artists for drawing fan art. To my recollection, I have only come across one person who did this, but it's one of those things that stuck in my head because the way that they went about it really put me off of them as a person. In fairness, I already wasn't super invested in their art, kinda just wasn't for me, but it was the way that they treated other artists that made me not want to interact with them as a whole. The artist in question had a habit of condescending to and essentially directly stating that artists who drew fan art were lesser as artists. If I remember correctly, they weren't even arguing against fan art on the grounds of its technically copyright infringement. No, a good chunk of their argument was just, it's not original. According to this artist, anyone who drew fan art simply did so because they weren't creative enough to draw anything else. Which, if you know artists, or you are an artist, you probably know that's incredibly reductive because very rarely does an artist exclusively draw fan art. It's usually that they draw fan art in between their own original pieces. It's just that the frequency of that changes depending on the person. Or sometimes people do draw a lot of fan art when they're just starting out because they haven't fleshed out their own original ideas. Hell, sometimes people aspire to be a part of the media that they love so much, so they focus on that. Comic artists who grew up reading comics would be a great example of that. If you want comics to be your career, of course you're going to draw a lot of characters from comics because it showcases to an extent that you're capable of doing the job. Even if an artist does draw predominantly or even exclusively fan art, again, that doesn't mean that what they produce isn't art, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's lesser than other subjects. This artist was just really annoyingly condescending to those who wanted to explore subjects or topics that they had no interest in. Especially because this artist's original work was Like, okay, so normally when someone's deriding those who draw fan art, you would expect them to draw original characters, right? Well, this wasn't that. This was more like an exploration into the mind of the artist from the most basic level. You might then be like, oh, so it was their subconscious? Well, no, because the point of the subconscious is that it's subconscious, which is usually things that we don't know about ourselves or don't want to admit about ourselves. It was more things that existed on the surface and which the artist probably could have outright told you. Things like, I don't want to be too specific here. Okay, like, if they drew a design of a tree, separated it into different factions, and labeled each one things like interpersonal relations, childhood trauma, or loves. Since this was back on DeviantArt, each piece would then be accompanied with these huge walls of text, describing them all in detail in the image description because the pieces themselves never actually contained any symbolism that would have told you these things. It was all described through additional reading material. It was akin to writing fanfiction about yourself. Like a biography, but one where you just wax poetic about your mindset for pages on end. Very self-involved. I don't want to imply that the art itself was bad, but it was pretty pretentious for this artist to be deriding other people drawing fan art of things that they enjoy, and then having all of their own art be so self-focused. How can you go after others for not being original enough in their work when your work is entirely your personal feelings? Is that even you drawing things that you enjoy? I guess unless you specifically enjoy talking about yourself, or maybe it was a case of self-love or self-actualization? They did have another argument against drawing fan art. That argument being, people only draw fan art because it's popular and their work gets more attention because of it. Wow, tell me more about how you're jealous people aren't paying enough attention to you. Now that I think about it, this was probably the argument that really turned me off of them. The argument doesn't even make any sense on a broad scale. When you really think about this, that's an incredibly toxic mentality directed against other artists. That they don't draw things because they truly enjoy them, only to trick people into paying attention to them by pumping out work related to something popular. It's insanely cynical. I admit that I'm guilty of cynicism in a lot of respects as well, but not to such an extent that I would accuse those who draw things that I have no interest in of only doing it for shallow popularity. People are varied and everyone's reasons for exploring art are different. Some of them are shallow, there's absolutely no doubt about that, but such a sweeping generalization like that seems equally as shallow, making no effort to understand why people draw fan art, merely boiling it down to their intentions being vapid. Why would other artists ever want to give someone who essentially accused them of being fake fans the time of day? They might as well have just come out and said that they think other artists are fake liars who are only concerned with popularity. Incidentally, this artist also bemoaned the fact that their art didn't gain as much of an audience by virtue of its unique originality. Ain't that always the case? That's the thing, too. If they believed that drawing fan art was the way to get attention on your work, and they wanted that attention on their original work, couldn't they have just used fan art in order to draw people to their original works? Lead them to your work through familiar properties so that you can then instill an interest in your original ones. Clearly, they had a cynical enough mentality to believe that this was how you do it, and that it was a notoriously easy way to do it, so why not take advantage of that ease if it's for the sake of getting eyes on what you believe to be more fulfilling original work? Especially if they believed that self-focused work was intrinsically better. Of course they weren't going to do that, because they had already established this pretentious mindset that fan art is unoriginal, and I suppose they couldn't then risk going down that route and being labeled a hypocrite. Like it somehow makes them better that they would never deign to sully their fingers with making fan art. If other artists were vapid and shallow for drawing fan art for popularity, how is drawing a bunch of self-focused fanfiction also for the sake of popularity not equally vapid and shallow? If anything, doesn't that just mean that other artists are working smarter because they engaged in a practice that objectively brought more attention to their work? That's the thing too. That cynical mentality and that dissatisfaction with nobody paying attention to their work already betrayed a level of hypocrisy. This artist wanted people to pay attention to art that was wholly self-involved, wanting people to take an interest in their innermost desires, thoughts, and feelings, essentially wanting their audience to take an interest in them as a person, but they themselves were unwilling to do that for other people. Realistically, the characters and media that a person enjoys can say a lot about who they are. are, their personality, or their interests. Does a person enjoy bad boy types? Do they gravitate towards more emotionally complex characters? Do they like yanderes or kuderes? Can they appreciate manipulative types? Is that in all forms, or do they have exceptions to their rules? If you really pay attention to the types of characters that people take an interest in, sometimes even asking them why they like those characters, because in fairness, they might see something about them that you don't, you can get a better idea of what they're like as a person. People who like Spider-Man might do so because they were nerds in school, or they felt helpless in their home lives and so they projected onto or aspired to be like him. Those who like She-Hulk could like her for her career-driven creativity, her panel-breaking snark, or maybe they think muscular women are pretty. People who like Senshi might have an interest in cooking, or are attracted to men who can cook, or maybe they have an aesthetic preference for derpy characters or those with limited facial expressions. Maybe a person could like glitz and glam because they like bitchy characters, or because they like the opposing thematic duality of twins, or just because they're based on their favorite fish. Someone might like Double Trouble because they were a theater kid, they love the chaotic air that the character creates, their ability to pick up on and bring out people's insecurities, or because Double Trouble is body goals. There are multiple different ways to view and appreciate singular characters and properties, and the parts that people take preference to are going to change depending on the person. Look, here, I can even use myself as an example. I tend to gravitate towards intelligent characters, both because, generally speaking, intelligence is an attractive trait to me, but also because I think it's a good trait to aspire towards. But I have exceptions to this preference. Smart characters are appealing because I'm curious about their motivations or their goals. I want to see what they're going to do next. If the motivation doesn't appeal to me, if I find it shallow or uninteresting, or I find their overall personality too much of an annoyance, maybe they're snooty or self-involved, then I might default to a different character preference. A character could be dumb as a rock, but if they're funny and compelling, that might not matter. Maybe they veer into hopeless romantic territory and they become more appealing as they are more honest about those motivations. You've got bad boys with hearts of gold, or those with a cat-like quality who play with their food. Maybe you take a different approach and make a character very sarcastic, something that's indicative of both intelligence and hidden insecurities that can be explored. Villains are exceptionally fun in that regard too, both intellectually and thematically appealing. Seriously, who doesn't love a good scary villain? And that's exclusively talking about personality, when design also plays a huge role here. Like, I have a preference for oceanic and robotic themes, so characters based around those design elements might appeal to me more, but it's never a solid guarantee that I'm gonna like a character just because they do fit into those thematic preferences. My favorite animals are cephalopods, which is why I like multibrachial characters. I could just tell you those things, but where would the fun be in that when I could draw the characters that I enjoy and people can read into it? Someone who's really fond of space could have heavy celestial themes in their work, whether that be the color palettes of nebulas, references to the sun and moon, or themes based around the zodiac. People obsessed with food could create stories that allow them to draw or animate delicious meals. A person who loves monsters might create stories either dominated by those creatures, or which frame them in a sympathetic light, or even as main characters. Oh, totally forgot. People can also have character preferences based on that character's archetype, their role in the story. That could range from things like protagonists, martyrs, joke antagonists, sociopathic villains, mentor characters, or even annoying mascots. Maybe things get a little more specific than that, where they like protagonists, but only if the character meets a certain other criteria, like redheads, even if the viewer themselves isn't a redhead. Someone could have a preference for optimistic female love interests, just as someone else could prefer angsty male ones. Characters who look almost exactly the same could be preferred or disliked based on that personality change. Do you like the criminal pseudo-dad trash man, or the brooding, isolated explorer of the unknown? I myself enjoy intimidating Lovecraftian villains, as well as having a very notable preference for mad scientist archetypes. Whew. Oh boy. Literally just looking at my persona, you can probably see my oceanic aesthetic preferences in the tentacles, the robotic preferences in my screen eye, the fact that I have an interest in characters with limited or unique emotional expression, or the fact that I gravitate towards villain characters because black and green is a prominent villain color scheme. Subtlety and symbolism and media literacy and all that jazz. I don't necessarily have to tell someone that I enjoy these things. It should come across in an artist's work. It's just that the level to which they are able to do that effectively may depend on the skill of the artist and the audience's ability to read into and consciously acknowledge those nuances. Because that's another thing. Media literacy is often colored by the personality or experiences of the one doing the reading, which is why different people could like the same characters for different reasons. This artist either didn't have the psychological foresight to recognize that, or else just uncharitably boiled everyone who drew things that they didn't agree with as vapid, uninteresting, shallow subjects. And that does make you wonder, if they didn't have the psychological know-how to be able to read anything other than fame-driven hypocrisy from others, how accurate would any psychological assessment based on themselves even be? Wouldn't they be too clouded by their own perceptions of self, given that this was seemingly the entire driving force behind their work, and we know that projection is a thing? It does sort of make you wonder. There are plenty of ways that a person's favorite characters can showcase aspects of who they are on a subconscious level. It's just a matter of looking a little deeper and not attributing it to an exclusively shallow performance. The artist I'm talking about probably could have done the same thing, showcased aspects of who they were by explaining why they enjoyed watching certain characters. That may have then made it easier for others to relate to them and thus want to see more of their content. If the goal was to get eyes on their work and their argument is that people make fan art because it's more likely to get attention from others, realistically speaking, that could have served as an effective means of both showcasing their values, traumas, and preferences as a person and getting fresh-faced viewers. Like, if anything, kinda seems like any bias or potential jealousy directed towards others may have been impeding their own ability to utilize these tactics to their benefit without compromising their morals. They acknowledged its prospect as a tactic, but overall thought themselves too good to use it, and then expressed disdain when the tactics they thought to be better didn't bear the desired fruits. By the way, that's actually a fun exercise to do if you've never looked into it. Take a bunch of your favorite characters, try to recognize the patterns between them, and figure out why you gravitate towards those archetypes or designs. You might learn something about yourself. Maybe it also says something about how this artist negatively viewed their audience if they didn't believe that they had the capacity to read into things, needing to have everything spelled out for them. Damn, now that I think about it, I wonder if this artist was just pretentiously self-involved and thought everybody else was dumb. Either way, someone having such an uncharitable view of other artists whilst whining that people aren't giving them attention is like a combination of things that irk me. They're obsessed with the numbers, they can't get over their jealousy, they deride others for drawing things that are none of their business, they have sweeping cynical generalizations that condescend and imply ill intent of other artists. Art should be fun, and this person was condescending to people for having fun and accusing them of lying about even enjoying the act. Why would you boil down the expression of love that is fan art into such a cynical and shallow purpose? So of course, lumping all of that together into a single individual is going to make them a pet peeve. Number 9. Self-righteous artists. These are the type of people who think that they're better than you simply by virtue of being artists. The types who would look at a mechanic or an accountant or a grocery store employee and decide that their job as an artist is more important because they create things, as if their chosen career path is on a higher pedestal than anyone else's, and that being creative is this 1 in a million human trait that somehow makes them special. You know, usually the I'm the main character, everybody else is just a mindless NPC type of individual. In my experiences, oftentimes this mentality is more indicative of their own close-mindedness and thus lack of creativity. So yeah, probably a little projection going on there, where they struggle to see the artistic value in any career path that isn't art, and are completely ignorant to the creative mindset necessary to succeed in those other jobs. You don't have to be an artist to have a creative mind, it's simply a matter of looking at situations from a different perspective and coming up with unorthodox or unique solutions to a problem. Psychologists can come up with creative solutions to a person's triggers. Advertising executives could come up with creative ways to grab your attention. Executive office assistants often have to skirt around the limitations presented by a boomer boss who may not even know what they're talking about. Marine researchers may find themselves in a battle of wits against the octopus that keeps breaking out of containment. Artistically speaking, one of the problems our career focuses on is generally personal or creative expression, and our solution to that problem is creating art, but that isn't the only way to do it. You could sing karaoke, you could test your brain with complex mathematical equations, you could play a puzzle game. It's just a matter of how your brain wants to express itself. Some people do it with numbers, and some people do it with pictures. Being able to do one over the other doesn't make one person better than someone else. It just means that their skill sets are useful in different contexts. Ultimately, these artists fail to recognize that, whether that be through a genuine lack of understanding or a willful ignorance because they want to view themselves as superior. And Cthulhu forbid if you're an artist too, because they either see that as a challenge or as a threat. I guess after an indeterminate number of years of building up this identity as the one outlying creative mind in their inner circles, having another artist show up sends their whole sense of self spiraling down a whirlpool. It's potentially even worse if, as an artist, you're more skilled at your craft than they are. I'm sure that some of what I'm thinking of here reads as narcissism, but the way some people with this mentality try to dance around that notion or invalidate the accomplishments of others to draw attention back to their own is legitimately fascinating. I question how much of this is a conscious choice versus how much is an instinctual defense mechanism. I can't even assure you that it's much better if you're not of a higher skill level than they are, because that's when the condescension usually comes into play. Oh, it's so cute that you're trying to be an artist too. Well, you're not quite at my level yet, but maybe you'll get there one day. I was gonna list some backhanded compliments as examples, but I'm struggling to think of any right now. I guess I'm just not creative enough in that regard. One of the things I contemplated while writing this script was how the emergence of AI-generated imagery was going to affect artists with this mindset. There's the potential that they would become more self-conscious because this super important role that they've propped up for so long is now under threat or exists at a standard that they struggle or simply can't live up to. Or perhaps there's the possibility that this change is going to push them even further into this narrative, idealizing their role as a human creator as even more important and unique than they had originally promoted. Sorta Carol and Tuesday, but more involved. Are we going to get more people with this mindset because human art is the only way that you can guarantee copyright over a piece, and so that sort of art is going to be more desirable and harder to attain in a world flooded with AI garbage? I mean, I guess there's always the chance that they could eat a slice of humble pie, but, you know, with narcissistic traits, I don't really expect much. And before we get to the last one, I'd actually like to add in an honorary mention. Not quite a pet peeve, but close enough that it's worth noting. Honorary mention: irresponsible posters. This one specifically has to do with artists who post inappropriate content on websites that it should not be posted on. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. Art of the spicier variety. Usually of the, that's really specific, I wonder if they're getting something out of it variety. Or spicy comics, sometimes fan comics, featuring characters from games, movies, or TV shows with a large child fan base, proudly paraded around without content warnings or sometimes even tags, because I'm convinced a lot of these freaks get off on the idea that literal children might be forced to see what jingles their jollies. Like, if you're actively posting fetish content to a website dominated by children, or you're requesting or commissioning underage artists to draw this content for you, you're a sick freak predator who's doing it on purpose. You cannot convince me otherwise. Once or twice is a mistake. Over 100 times is a fucking pattern. I'm not saying that everybody who posts something that might be constituted as a weird kink has to tag it as mature content. Some of them are definitely more innocuous than others. Maybe someone legitimately just made fan art of that Violet Beauregard scene from Willy Wonka and didn't know about the subculture lurking behind it. And Lord knows I've seen plenty of people get requests or commissions where they did not know there was something more behind it. But if you're making the content for a specific purpose, you know well enough what it is and what it is for. You should know not to spam it on websites for children. If you've got an entire gallery full of this stuff, we know what you're using it for. Plus, like, I'm sure that one could make the argument that if an innocuous kink is commissioned from an artist who doesn't have that kink, and that artist, not knowing it's supposed to be for a kink, doesn't intend for it to be a kink, does it still count if it wasn't their intention with creating the piece? Or does it instead depend on how closely they're sticking with the specifications of the commissioner? Which takes precedent in that case, the intent of the artist or the intent of the commissioner? Like, at the very least, if the commissioner's got a whole gallery worth of a collection, it makes it obvious in a broader context. But does that then still apply individually? It's like the single commission is only one piece of a much larger, more disgusting puzzle. Man, art is weird. Some of these commissioning artists like to argue this stance, that, oh, I'm just posting what I like, or that commissioning spicy content can be expensive, so of course they're going to turn to cheaper artists, or artists who flat out take free requests, who are almost always underage, but I don't care. If you, as a grown-ass adult, approach children with the intent of exposing them to, or having them produce content that you get off to, or else post the content yourself on websites that have a high concentration of kids, without tagging or putting a warning on it to avoid it being seen by those kids, you are an opportunistic freak who preys on children for the sake of convenience. How about you have some common fucking sense and decency? And as I'm writing this, of course my brain is screaming at me about the time some guy kept trying to ask me to draw Melody from The Little Mermaid 2 barefoot and captured by Morgana. This being, unsurprisingly, when I was underage. Like, these weirdos are all over the place. You want to post spicy content? Post it to an 18+ website that is designed for that content.
Oh, but I don't get the same level of interaction from those sites.
Yeah, probably because the majority of interactions are from children. Because out of every demographic online, children have the most free time. Or are you upset that the adults are just going to use the piece for its intended purpose, you know what it is, and then go to sleep? If you're so concerned, make your own spicy content website that is more artist-friendly and which encourages community interaction. Make it like Twitch, where you can get points for posting or commenting or favoriting art pieces or something. Make it like Picarto, where artists can live stream the creation of the spicy art. Just make it 18+. Websites dominated by kids have content warnings and content guidelines for a reason, and it is to protect children using the site from seeing content that they shouldn't be exposed to. If you're going out of your way trying to work around those guidelines to either post that content for your own benefit or to send it directly to those kids because you so desperately want people to see it, you're being selfish, irresponsible, and disgusting. Nobody needs to see your Undertale OC fan comic where the majority of the romantic tension is elicited through unwanted contact of the physical, crotchular variety.
But I was traumatized.
Man, shut the hell up. You're a grown-ass adult. Go to therapy.
But it's my trauma art.
Okay, then maybe you should acknowledge the fact that it's potentially traumatic and prevent kids from seeing it. People justify posting some of the most horrendous things by classifying it as their trauma art. But you having been traumatized in the past does not give you a carte blanche excuse to post content that could be used to harm other people in the present day. In some instances, this content is even made by minors. Many times when I was in high school and just out of it, I did stumble across an artist around my age who was posting spicy fan content, indulging in a fan base full of other overly sexual teens and sometimes tweens. I know that sometimes this stuff is perpetuated by the kids themselves, because hormones are a crazy roller coaster, and sometimes you want to express those insane hormone fluctuations through your art. Sometimes they've just been influenced by someone who really shouldn't be around children. I'm not as miffed when they do it. I think they should be taught to be more cautious about the content they upload online, but I don't blame them for it. I blame the adults. At the end of the day, if you're an adult posting content that children should not see on websites dominated by children, and you're not either appropriately tagging it or, better yet, putting a content block on it so that anyone under the age of 18 can't see it, we're gonna have beef. I am not like Yolani Vesser in this regard. I do eat meat and I got some beef. The reason I had to make this one an honorable mention and not a proper part of the list is because it sort of actually does understandably tick me off. It's not really so much of a pet peeve if I'm getting legitimately angry. Also because I realized this after writing that whole section, and heck to just scrapping all of that. Number squid, or alternatively, number cuttlefish. Do you get it? I'm naming it based on how many tentacles and arms that they have. Artists who apparently can't fucking shower. Little story for this one. It was my first day of college during the whole orientation for each class affair that I assume is a common first day thing. If I'm remembering correctly, the first class of the day was basically art history. That may not necessarily have been the name of the class, but that's what it consisted of. Anyways, as I was sitting and listening to the professor do their whole introductory blah blah blahs, they kept mentioning this program that I was totally clueless about. If you've been to college in the past however many years, you're probably aware of at least one website that your professors would post your assignments on, and which you were probably required to submit your assignments through. I assume that before orientation day, we'd all gotten emails informing us about the website that my college was using, but I completely missed that email. So when my professor was detailing how everything would be available on insert word that didn't specify that it was a website, I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. So orientation finishes, we're told to come up and collect some sheets of paper with the class's curriculum on it, and the professor gives anyone with questions the opportunity to ask them while up there. I walked up, grabbed my sheets, approached the professor, and nearly threw up. Unbeknownst to me, who, of course, likes to sit close to the back and away from people, there was a really strong smell emanating from the professor. Not in the sense of like, oh, they clearly ate something that was very pungent, because at least in those instances, the smell is usually delicious, even if strong. No, this one was more like, if you've ever crossed paths with someone who hadn't showered in months, that was what the professor smelled like. Reminder, this was the first fucking day. It straight up smelled as though they hadn't showered all summer. Like if someone had told me they had been living like Oscar the Grouch until literally 5 minutes before class, I would have believed them. Needless to say, I never directly approached that professor after that point. I did walk past them in the halls a few times by accident, and they never stank to that degree again from what I remember. So it was probably specifically that they just hadn't showered before orientation. Artists, I understand that you can sometimes get a little caught up in your work. Cthulhu knows I've been guilty of that, and I've certainly met a few artists who shared this personal hygiene issue after this experience. But please, if you are going to be in close proximity to other people, take a fucking shower. And there you have it, part 1 of the list of pet peeves that I have with artists. No, you didn't mishear that. Part 1. Remember how I said that this script document with all of my notes was 53 pages? Yeah, it's actually 91 now. So we're actually going to do the smart thing and separate this one script into 3 videos of comparable length. That seems fair to me as a creator, so I don't burn myself out on something stupid like a pet peeves video. When will part 2 come out? Who knows? Technically, I'm editing them all together, but I am going to space them out between other videos so you guys don't get overwhelmed. I know I like to joke about how us artists complain a lot, but, you know, yeah, I can't let people think that's all we do. Sometimes we also have to invite our friends over to help us move and then trap them in a dark room until they have sufficiently mocked a 14-year-old's artwork to an acceptable degree. What? Everybody being trapped in the next room right now? That being a video I'm working on? Pshaw! I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. Thank you for joining me on this little dive. There are some towels to dry yourself off on the way out. Don't forget that if you've got your own story about artist pet peeves, please leave it in the comment section for the rest of us to enjoy. And while you're doing that, we can take a little gander at some neat artwork that some of you lovely little mola molas have so sweetly drawn for me in the form of a fan art feature! We open up to a fun, more lacy design by J.M. Saraby, adding a little extra flair to Ponder Sprocket's outfit, even with the added bonus of a fiend backpack, a beautifully expressive face and hands to match the slightly angular painted stylization. That, tied in with the lovely shadow fading, her simultaneously weighted but bouncy hair into the line art color, was an absolutely fantastic choice that pairs nicely with the 2-tiered shadows for her skin, pulling you in with a simple inviting pose and then wowing you with the colors. Next, we'll shake things up a tad with a more comedically cartoonish style in the form of Laughing Ponder by One Man Show Off, giving us a neat, more angular twist on how the character is typically seen. I could see this design working for a Saturday morning cartoon style animation, and while I know the styles are not necessarily the same, that paired with how her eyes are always hidden makes me think of Kids Next Door. I don't know what she's laughing about, but honestly, we should probably be scared. Reminding you that she is the cool girl that you probably want to be friends with but are too scared to approach, here's The Octomama That Is Ponder Sprocket by MC Jiggles. Here's The Octomama That Is Ponder Sprocket by MC Jiggles, giving us the fluffy hair danglies that I love so much and some nice soft shading to go easy on the eyes. Ponder Sprocket looking like someone just asked her to move something heavy and she's all geared up because she knows she can do it. Also, I know it's a very small thing, but just look at Fiend's little eye down there. He is Blobbums. He is baby. I love him. Veering into the digital digital reality, we have Ponder Sprocket by Android Infinite 8, taking a little more inspiration from the cyber part of the Ponder Sprocket duo. Not only do we have the lovely, almost metal-esque color distribution on the name, we get the grid background paired with the glow cast from Fiend onto his Ponder. The way the shadow is done underneath her also brings about this level of depth to the character, so you really do get a scope for how she fits into this three-dimensional space. I also just noticed that the laces design for the shoes has been changed to tentacles, and that is such a cool extra touch. Delving into cross-media representation, we have You Fuckwits version 1 and 2 by Ovive, taking inspiration from, of course, Danganronpa Trial Objections. Gotta say, the teal highlight used across her hair and face is such an interesting choice. It really breaks up the brown and makes an interesting pair with the slight reddish-purple tint of her hair. And then, of course, working beautifully with the magenta and purple on all of the surrounding arms and suckers, just wonderfully dynamic. About to roundhouse kick some fun into you, we have An Octomom by Visit Keru, combining the high-energy passion of Ponder Sprocket in a fighting stance with Fiend dancing? I mean, I'm not complaining. A flick of the ankles and a swish of the tentacles, and that's just a good Friday night is all I'm saying. Clearly, Keru knew how to keep us engaged. And Fiend's such a little happy boy, how can you not love that? And now let me introduce you to Knock a Fool Out with the Truth by ArtisticInker. Fun fact, this piece is actually a little lore accurate, as a major part of Fiend's design function is to accommodate the fighting needs of their Ponder, and Ponder Sprocket is a brawler by nature. He literally does wrap his arms around her to give her giant fists. That, paired with the more sleek interpretation of her outfit, makes her feel like she's come directly from a fighting game. I really do feel like she's about to knock me out. You have succeeded! For a little more depth to her step, may I present Ponder Sprocket by One-Legged Zombie, giving us more of a presentational pose. The subtle angular design to her clothes really vibes with me, as well as how Zombie kind of faded out her other leg to create a level of depth in the piece. Small thing, but the little fingertip tentacle touch between Sprocket and Fiend is really cute. Just a light, I'm there for you, buddy. Very in keeping with their dynamic. Here to make your girlfriend jealous, we have Some Messy Doodles by Alexdsntwerhets. Which vibes, Alex, you do you. Gotta say, Ponder Sprocket in a slightly shorter dress is really nice, not only showing off those could probably kill you thighs, but also giving us a free ticket to the gun show. You spoil us. I like this very subtle little dynamic of Ponder Sprocket probably flirting, Fiend bored, and then Ponder Sprocket showing off and Fiend being such a supportive little bean. Very accurate. I have to admit, Hydra's symbol has always struck me as really cool, but any Hydra organization based on Ponder Sprocket would be against oppression. I can like their design aesthetics and not stand for their ideals. But yeah, may I present to you the Pondra logo, created by The Weird One, in its original incarnation and a more recent design choice, taking Ponder Sprocket's more recognizable, huggable face and meshing it with the symmetrical tapestry that are Fiend's arms. I'm gonna be so for real, if it was up to me, I probably would just use this logo design. I want this on a sticker. And softening up the scene for us, here's Octomom by Dekyun, going for a simple, light, almost comic booky type feel. I like the usage of the much more vibrant highlights specifically on Fiend's tentacles to really help them shine, while the lighting on Ponder Sprocket is much more subtle for her human skin tone. Then of course, the shading for her hair looks so cool for how minor it is, along with just the way that her hair is drawn to begin with, as well as adding that little extra depth by fading out Fiend's tentacles. Beautiful. And finally, we'll end off with a badass, super sharp Y2K-esque style in the form of the Glorious Ponder Sprocket by Neon Ghost that, for me at least, kinda sparks the feels of graffiti meets Japanese anime interpretations of Western cartoons, using a combination of thick line art and a white outline to make the figure pop into the foreground in a pose that makes me think she's either going to start monologuing or break out into song. Fun, vibrant, and leaves you wanting more. Absolutely gorgeous. Speaking of wanting more, if you like any of these pieces and want to see more from these artists, please don't hesitate to go send them some love through the links that I have provided for you down in the description. Unfortunately, sometimes when older fan art pieces are selected, the links to those artists can end up being now defunct, so if anyone can pitch in new links for those that are missing, it's always appreciated. You can also send updated links to the fan art feature email at emptycomicsfanart@outlook.com, which is also where you can send your own fan art. Shocker, I know. Remember to please include either a link to your socials or or else the specification that you don't want a link provided. I tend to still feature these older fan arts because even if I can't find a person's social links, they still put in the work in the art, and that was very sweet of them, and I want to show my appreciation. But with the way I do things now, if you don't provide either, then I can't feature your piece. Got it? My links are also down there if you are so inclined, which, little pause there, includes my Patreon. Yeah, I found out apparently a lot of you guys don't know that I have a Patreon. I do. I just feel self-conscious about advertising it, so I don't like to talk about it very often, which is why it's sort of just lumped together into the My Links bit. As a preliminary, this is what you're getting into thing. My Patreon only has one tier. It's all $1. You get to see sneak previews of a bunch of stuff I'm working on because I'm always working on a zillion things at once. I do polls sometimes. You even get to see videos that never actually end up getting finished for whatever reason. I've had a couple of those at this point. I also tend to have really strong creative bursts that then get offset by low points, which means that I will go for about maybe 2 weeks where I'm posting almost every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, and then there will be a couple weeks where I literally forget Patreon exists. Yeah, don't worry, friends have told me that I should probably see a doctor about that. In those instances, you can basically guarantee that I'm either working on physical artwork that I don't take pictures of, or I'm scripting. So there's that. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you know, it's $1, 12 bucks a year, not too bad as a subscription, all things considered. I also found out recently that a lot of you guys don't know that I stream on Twitch. I also do that. Fun fact about that, if ever I have a premiere scheduled on my channel, you can actually go over to Twitch and I'll be working on the thumbnail while the premiere is ticking down. That's why when you're watching the premiere, sometimes the thumbnail will update and the art will change and progress as it gets closer to the start time. That's literally me working on the thumbnail over on Twitch. Obviously, I've also got my DeviantArt. I've also mostly stopped using Twitter and switched on over to Blue Sky because, well, if you've been on Twitter the past year, you probably know why. I'm not terribly active on Blue Sky because of how busy I've been lately, but if you're ever worried about YouTube not notifying you when I've got a new video coming out, you can check out Blue Sky or Twitch for a double dose of notifications. Sorry for all that. Normally, I wouldn't spend so long shilling my own crap, but people telling me that they didn't even realize these options existed was a little eye-opening, and doing so may actually help me support the people I need to in my personal life a little easier, so, you know, at some point I have to suck it up, get past my insecurities, and actually market my content like a real whatever I am. See, I can't even say the word. Whatever, we'll see how long that lasts. A big old thanks to Linlin for being the editorial sacrifice for this video. Couldn't have done it without her. And with that, go have fun making art. AI bro. Nope. First line. All right. So, we're actually gonna try something different today because I now have a standing desk. The studio is all coming together, I guess. Anyways, I'm gonna be standing up while I record this, and we'll see if it's any better, if my physicality is better. It's not gonna be the whole recording because most of it's already done, but it's definitely gonna be little bits and pieces of it for 3 different videos. So we'll see how the quality maintains, I guess. Oh my god, I didn't do my preliminary cracks. What is this nonsense? Partially because it's what they see all the time. Partially because it's what they see all... I keep whistling when I say see. Oh, that water's gone stale. Great. Love that. The image doesn't look the way it does because... this is inherently different. Artists, because legally speaking, if what you create cannot be copyrighted, then it is legally speaking, if what you create cannot be copyrighted, then it is not considered. Fuck. Oh my god. Legally should not be such a difficult word to say. Legally speaking, if what you create cannot be copyrighted.